Welcome back to the Docket Index, the podcast where we talk with legal leaders about what's actually happening inside their practices, the shifts they're seeing, and how they're navigating change in real time. Today's conversation is one I've really been looking forward to. I'm joined by Steven Gobert, founder of the law office of Steven C. Gobert in Lafayette, Louisiana. Steven has spent over 2 decades practicing law, much of that time in workers' compensation. And more recently, he's made a major pivot into family law at a point in his career when most attorneys would be trying to hold things steady, not reinvent them. What makes this conversation especially compelling is why that shift happened and how Steven's own personal experiences, faith, and community work have shaped the way he now shows up for clients, particularly men navigating divorce and custody in family law. Steven, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, I want to start with the moment that really caught my attention. You practiced workers' comp for 22 years, and then suddenly family law calls started flooding the office, and you really felt a calling to pursue that in addition to your work with workers' comp. Walk me through that moment. What did it feel like, practically and emotionally?
Honestly, it was a bit disorienting at first. I had done workers' compensation for over 2 decades. It was familiar, predictable. I was very comfortable there. And then I'd say probably 18 months or so ago, almost overnight, the phone just started ringing with all these family law calls. And at first, I'd have a network of family law attorneys I'd refer these cases to. I tried to rationalize this as maybe just a temporary market shift. But after a while, it just became clear that this wasn't random. There was a clear pattern to this. And, ultimately, I kind of just had to decide for myself, whether or not it was something that I was willing to listen to or just, kind of continue to fight off.
Yeah. And was it sort of one moment or a gradual realization that you decided you really wanted to lean into family law?
I would say obviously a gradual thing. Like I said, as the phone kind of kept ringing with all these family law inquiries, I just kind of had a moment where I had to decide for myself, that it's time to just stop asking why the phone is ringing this way and ultimately just start asking myself, what was I being called to do?
Absolutely. And, I think that is a perfect segue. One thing that really stands out about your work is that you feel called to represent, especially men in family law. Why do you think men are so underrepresented or underserved in this space?
Yeah, I think for men specifically, a lot of men don't seek help until they're already behind, either emotionally, financially, strategically. And many men feel judged almost the moment they walk into a family law office. A lot of them are afraid of being labeled as the bad guy or, dismissed as the disengaged father. So, a lot of times that rejection, I guess, causes men to either, shut down or go into battle mode. And, I've seen that over time, neither of those responses serves them well.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. What do you think men need that they're often not getting from traditional family law attorneys? Or is it that they don't seek them, like you said, in the first place?
I think amongst many things, I would say the top on that list is that men just often need help articulating what they're actually feeling and what they want long term, not just what they're currently angry about in the moment. They, also, I feel like through this process kind of need a reassurance that advocating for their role as a father doesn't make them selfish or hostile. I think a big part of my job as the attorney is just to kind of help slow things down for them and helping them figure out how to respond thoughtfully instead of, react emotionally in the moment.
Yeah, I love that. It sounds like there's really a lot of emotional support, education, and then sort of just a different advocacy style, which is really empowering.
Correct.
You've been through a divorce and custody yourself. How does that shape the way that you practice today? And what can you say to a client or that maybe other attorneys, frankly, just can't if they haven't had the same experience?
Yeah, I think having gone through this myself, it just gives me an empathy that cannot be manufactured. It's like you either have empathy or you learn through experience to develop empathy.
Totally.
And, I feel like my own personal experience, I understand the sleepless nights, the fear of losing time with your kids, the frustration of feeling misunderstood. And I feel like my ability to be able to tell a client, specifically a man, me too, like I know what this is like. It just kind of changes the trust nature of an attorney client relationship. And I believe how they hear my advice.
Yeah, I think that's totally legitimate. You also mentioned that not enough attorneys share their personal journey. Why do you think that is? What are they maybe afraid of? Or how would you encourage other attorneys to share their own personal journeys as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I certainly don't mean to speak for anyone else, but I feel like as lawyers, we're trained to project control and certainty. And vulnerability maybe feels like a weakness in our profession.
Sure.
There's a fear that I think that by sharing your own story somehow undermines credibility. And I've kind of found specifically in family law that it's the opposite. Like when you can share appropriately, it almost builds trust instead of, challenges it.
I think that's a great distinction too, that it really is particularly in the family law realm,
Right.
that could be most meaningful. Let's see. So as we, were preparing for this podcast, you said something that really stuck with me, that isolation is something that men specifically kind of go to. Can you talk more about that? What's the difference about sort of how men tend to handle this struggle and then your role in helping them sort of get through the process?
Yeah. And I guess, again, I'd start with me too, right? Like my own experience through this, men tend to retreat inward when they're struggling. We don't want to burden others or admit that we're overwhelmed. And I think that the isolation can feel protective in the moment, but usually over time, it's nothing but destructive.
I think that's a great answer. You've also talked a lot about your role in the community. How has your sense of community and your community involvement changed the way that you work and represent clients in your practice, both in terms of sort of taking on family law, but also even when you were working on workers' comp cases?
Yeah, I think specifically with family law recently, I don't believe in coincidences, but there's a local nonprofit organization, Keep Pointing Up, which is kind of a men's ministry here in the Lafayette, Acadiana area that really kind of kicked off a latter part of summer, early fall last year. And it was the perfect timing for me. And it just kind of, my own personal experiences that, I realized by getting involved in this group that I was carrying too much, frankly, and I was doing it alone. And I think that, KPU kind of showed up at the exact right time for me, not necessarily with answers or any fixes, but to kind of, again, provide me with presence and community and almost try to, not try to fix me, but just walk with me. And
Absolutely.
It so much highlighted this isolation piece that I feel like you don't have to do this alone,
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So I've kind of carried that into this family law practice specifically, and encouraging men to, get out of your own head, get out of this isolation, find community. We have a monthly KPU dinner and speaker. And for the first time I ever practice, I'm inviting clients to come with me to it. So yeah, it's been great.
That's amazing. Let's talk business for a minute. You're shifting your marketing budget and your sort of overall firm persona toward family law. What's working so far? What's been harder to crack? And how does that ultimately compare to, your work in workers' comp?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's different, but I feel like what I'm trying to convey is, education and truly authenticity. I feel like short videos with like real questions, speaking plainly, kind of letting people see exactly who I am as a person instead of, some polished legal caricature on top of an 18-wheeler. So some other cheesy lawyer commercial, right?
Absolutely. Well, and that's another great segue. You mentioned getting over the discomfort of filming videos and really speaking to people, which I know a lot of attorneys struggle with. How did you push through that? Do you have any advice for lawyers who are camera shy?
Oh, yeah. And I definitely still struggle with it. It definitely doesn't feel like it comes natural to me. But like I said, I feel like the way I mentally got through this, and I'm continuing to get through this, is that I just reframed it, to where I'm not necessarily performing. I'm just explaining. And I feel like if I can explain something across the desk, which I've done for 22 years, I can clearly explain it into a camera.
Absolutely. I love that.
Not to say that I'm great at it, but like I said, it's kind of the way that I frame it mentally.
Totally. And finally, what's your approach to marketing to men specifically without alienating potential female clients?
Yeah, great question. I have a ton of female clients. And I think even when it comes to family law, I feel like in every case, no matter the circumstances, there's always this miscommunication. And I feel like by being a man myself and having gone through this, a lot of times I can help provide that perspective to women. But I think I shared this with you last time. I have a wife and I have 3 daughters. So in no way, shape, or form am I, anti-women. I'm definitely pro, family, pro fatherhood. And I feel like by focusing on values, maybe instead of like demographics, integrity, compassion, faith, family, like those all resonate across the board, regardless of, gender. And I feel like at the end of the day, right, like I just feel compelled that if I lead my business with principles, people kind of self-select, right? Like someone can come and sit and meet with me. They're under no obligation to hire me whatsoever. And if they do hire me, they become my boss, not the other way around. So there's no pressure. And I genuinely have experienced that being genuine, being authentic, being vulnerable, frankly, has lended itself well to people that sit across the desk who find themselves in, a very unfortunate situation, family-wise.
Yeah, I love that. That's a phenomenal answer. Steven, this has just been such an honest and thoughtful conversation. If someone listening is a man going through divorce or custody, or anyone going through divorce or custody, or even an attorney who's quietly in the middle of reinvention, what's one thing you'd want them to take away from your story?
I think we touched on it earlier, just the authenticity piece. I think as lawyers, it's like it's almost like bred into us that you have to be perfect. And I feel like family law specifically, I don't think clients are looking for perfect. I think clients are looking for a human. And I feel like being able to say, me too, and I understand, I've been there, I know what you're going through, it doesn't diminish professionalism or authority. I think it humanizes it.
I totally agree. I mean, in many ways, family law is sort of the imperfect side of law because you're going through something where you're ultimately dismantling what you hoped at some point would be perfect. And so
Correct.
To be met with somebody with vulnerability and kindness and empathy, I think is, just as important as the legal advice that you're giving them.
Absolutely. Right. It's the community piece, right? Like it's that you're not alone in this and that you have you have someone that you can go to.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again for joining me on the Docket Index. And to everyone listening, if this conversation resonated, we'll include links to Steven and his firm in the show notes. Until next time, this is the Docket Index.